have two great speakers. We're really happy to have Tom Clareson and Hallie Chemetsky with us. They're two longtime allies and supporters of World Arts West archive journey. They are here to talk about the basics of taking inventory and storing your physical and digital archival materials. The information is for people who are just beginning the journey, but also people who are well on their way, because as any dancer will tell you, you have to get the basics really well and keep revisiting them and practicing them regularly. So without further ado, oh, and also we will have questions and answers at the end. So as I said before, please keep track of those. Um, I'm first going to start out with Tom Clareson, who will briefly introduce himself. Tom,
Awesome.
thank you for joining us. Appreciate
Thank
it.
you. I am
Today,
really glad to be working with Cora and working with Hallie and talking with all of you this afternoon. I am the project director of Performing Arts Readiness, which is a service that actually helps organizations plan for and recover from disasters, all types of disasters. But we have started, as we're working through those issues, to think about archiving the business records, the historical records, the materials of your organizations as well. The other thing that I have an opportunity to do is I manage the Bay Area Arts Readiness Network, or BARN, which is a brand new project just started in October. And that is a focused effort on the Bay Area. And World Arts West has been a really important partner on that project since before it actually began, when we were just thinking about it. So why are we taking a look at these issues about archiving your materials? I think a couple of different reasons. It is a way to preserve the legacy of your organization or your arts practice. You can make your material available for the community for research. You can bring contributions to the forefront of cultural history. And as Cora has already mentioned, make sure that your art is not erased from the historical record, which is so important. So we have a really wide set of types of materials that might be available in performing arts archives. The things that are at the bottom there, that's what you might see in any library archive or museum archives, but ours are so much wider in scale with attire, costumes, instruments, certainly artwork and artifacts. And I think the other thing that we want to focus on here is certainly the sacred and ceremonial items and objects that many of you might keep at your organizations as well. So we need to be thinking about a wider really definition of archives as we go through today's session and as you start thinking about your activities. No matter what else I talk about today, I think that inventorying your collection and creating a list of what you have is the most important thing that you can do. Finding out where the physical location is, something you can do to keep it simple. And I want to bring up a resource that Hallie was really important in creating and distributing, which is the Dance USA Artist Legacy Toolkit that I think can help have you think about some of these archiving and inventorying ideas. Because it's not just what happens if donated collections arrive like this in some copy paper box. It's that they almost all the time do. What happens if a bunch of papers arrives at your front desk looking like this? Well, I think that the order of and the history of these materials has been pretty well destroyed. The provenance has been destroyed, and that tells us where the collection comes from, how it was created, and how it was and has been used. And I think the other thing is we don't know about the order once we see this. The original order tells us how the collections were created and arranged. And because something might come to you like this, it can be really difficult to look at. So if you get something like this, my message is do not panic. You're in the same situation as 98% of the organizations that I visit and work with. But I want you to think about what are the implications here? What do you see happening as the next steps? what would work best at your organization or for your practice, and what's most likely to happen. Um, Thinking about an appraisal, which is really determining whether the materials have long-term value for preservation in your archive, what I want you to think about is, how does this material fit in with the other things you have there? Does it complement and actually complete or add to those collections? Are you, as your organization, the best repository for these materials? And certainly, if you were the people who created them at your organizations, I think you are the best repository. Is this the best version available? The great thing is that Hallie will be able to talk about digital versions of things, and in some cases that might be easier to keep than a bunch of old records that arrive at your door. So thinking about, are you looking at the value of the material itself? The letters and all of those things, maybe handwritten notes, or are you looking at the information that's contained on that? And so I wanted to talk really quickly about the values of the material. Informational value. Is it important? Does it have research value? Is it unique to your organization? Um, then evidential, the idea that is it the best and most complete evidence about an activity happening? Say choreography charts or video of performances. And then intrinsic, this might be linked with an artistic merit, with important events at your organization, with fame, even with uniqueness of format, or even high monetary value that some materials might have in the future as well. So thinking about these considerations is really important as you consider what you want to keep, because you don't have to keep everything. But if you look at these materials and think about those values, I think that will help you. Secondary considerations, and these sometimes are really pretty high considerations from the get-go. Do we have space to house these materials? That can be difficult if you have a studio that a lot of it is in use for people to practice their art or perform. It can be difficult to find the spaces. Do we have the people power to do any kind of base level organization or processing of the materials? And then can we get any types of funding to process the materials? And are there funds attached to any type of donation? And what kind of stipulations are there? Are there any that would make you do some things in certain order? I always think about preservation during processing and acquisition. When that box of materials comes in, what would you look at first? Well, looking at it for mold or pests, anything that might get into your building or your collection, that's an important thing to check and see. And we can talk at a later point about some of the things that you can notice in those areas, but that is something, if you think you have problems in either of those areas, please contact me directly. You can inspect the films that you might have and see if any of them are nitrate-based films, and they will be labeled that way because they're difficult to keep in your collection safely. Removing rubber bands from materials and maybe putting things in folders or putting them in cotton ties is a better direction to go. Don't use Post-its. Using acid-free or paper flags is better than the sticky adhesive on the Post-its. And something Hallie and I talked about back and forth is the bottom bullet here: safely removing metal clips, rings, etc. The safely part is the most important. If it is something where it is going to cause you to have to tear anything or to have to really work on getting those metal clips and things out, please don't do that at this point, and work with others. Maybe talk with someone who has conservation experience to help you with that. When you're thinking about processing and preservation while you are taking these materials in, I think starting with quality, sturdy storage is important. I'd rather that you stay away from the copy paper boxes. I was recently at an archive in North Dakota where they had their materials stored in old beer boxes. And I was like, no, I'm not so sure about that. But looking at some things that have lids that can help to, save the materials, keep dust, dirt, moisture, etc., off of them is good. And then moving towards rehousing materials in acid-free, lignin-free packages that are sturdy and appropriate sized is important as well. And thinking about using polyester sleeves for the material can be important too. A couple of things to watch out for in your building or wherever this collection is held is to try to find stable temperature and humidity. Temperature not higher than 70 degrees. And I know I live in Phoenix, so it's really difficult 3/4 of the year to do that. But how, can we keep our area cool? And then relative humidity, not having it much higher than 50%, 30 to 50 is good. Trying to avoid sunlight and high light levels getting directly on your materials will help to make sure that they do not fade. And then keeping materials off the floor. And I know this is difficult. The idea that we may not have a whole lot of storage shelving, but what can we do to keep the materials off the floor and on shelves, or at least if it's on the floor, can we put a pallet under it so it's not directly in the line of getting any water in it? I wanted to highlight because I visited this organization when I was working with Cora at the beginning of our archiving project. These are some of the storage practices at the Mission Cultural Center for Latino Arts. And I think building up to this kind of cabinet and the way that they have the materials stored within the cabinet is a great goal to think about in the future. And the other thing is, and Cora and Anne and others and I have talked about this, looking at shared storage possibilities in the future. Is that something that could happen as well? I want you to think about developing these policies for your material, and particularly a collection policy. What are you going to collect, and what might you say I'm not going to bring in because it doesn't relate to my organization? I think writing up an incoming object receipt so people know that you have received it and are considering keeping it is important. And a deed of gift or acknowledgement letter that the material has come in is important as well. And one of the things that I think is really important, and when you walked into your collection, you might not know exactly what your predecessors did, or it might have taken a month to figure out what they did. But if you can start writing down procedures in how you are keeping your archives, your successors will definitely thank you. Write down what you do, the practices you follow, all of those areas. And then finally, I would be remiss if I didn't say a disaster plan is really important for you to have. The collection policy components, these are the kind of things that would be in one of those most important policies. What do you feel like the scope of what you want to collect is, and how do you bring that in and accession it into your organization? Are there things that you've decided, okay, now my archive is going a different direction. How can I de-accession that? And then we think about loans. We think about, do people want to photograph or reproduce our materials? And then insurance and access policies as well. And we can go into, and I can send you resources on development for every single one of these types of policies as a follow-up. I think a couple of good practices are creating a temporary receipt, appraising the donation, considering how it fits into your institution, decide to return it to the donor or bring it in as an accession and get it into your system, get a signed deed of gift, assign a collection number to the entire group of materials you're bringing in, and then think about a processing plan. How are you going to label folders and boxes and rehouse materials? And how are you going to plan to preserve them? And creating finding aids, a description with contextual information about these materials is important as well. Hallie and I were talking, and she said, Tom, you could go on for hours on just a couple of slides that you have. And I could, but I know that we have just a little bit of time. So I wanted to also talk about a couple of the other services that we have available through the Performing Arts Readiness Project. We have a lot of information resources, including information directly related to archiving. We have templates and tools to help you build disaster plans. But I think our most important thing is that we have training and conference programming. We have about 20 different webinars available, and they are available for free. We have live instructors 3 times a year and recordings throughout. And this week, on Wednesday, we have a class on archiving that Katie Kletlinger, who is the records manager for my parent organization and has worked with many organizations, has developed. We also have a couple of different areas of special focus as well. And we work with a couple of other organizations in addition to World Arts West. We work with NCAPER, the National Coalition for Arts Preparedness and Emergency Response, which is a wonderful advocacy organization. We work with D-Plan and Arts Ready to have an automated tool for disaster planning. And then certainly this might be something that some of you are involved with. We work with Surf Plus, the Craft Emergency Relief Fund that helps with craft collections as well. So with that in mind, I'm going to put this up, and this is something that Cora can share share messages with me, or you can write directly to me with any questions related to what we've talked about. But I want to make sure not to take any of Hallie's time. So I'm going to stop my sharing and go from there.
Thank you so much, Tom, and wanted to go ahead, Hallie, and continue with the presentation. Thank you.
Great. Let me share. Thank you for that, Tom. That was great. Hi, everybody. Great to be here. Thanks for spending some time talking about archiving today. I'm Hallie Chemetsky. I, until about 4 days ago, was the Director of Archiving and Preservation at Dance USA, but I am no longer in that role. But I am still, hovering around the world of dance archives. I have worked with World Arts West and sort of been involved in their archiving journey since 2020 when Dance USA, we placed an archiving fellow in our Archiving and Preservation Fellowship program with World Arts West. And ever since then, we've been in dialogue about their various archives projects. So Tom was mostly talking about the physical, as you heard. I'm going to talk more about digital records today. There's a few things that kind of apply across both. So I might sort of point you to places where you might see a crossover. I'm going to try to be fast. So my first slide is just to kind of ground us in how I know this can feel very overwhelming. And I know, especially if you've been working for a long time, if you have a lot of your own records or other people's records that you're getting handed, or elders in your community that you're hoping to, preserve their stuff. I know it can feel like a really big, daunting project. So my main message for people is just to do what you can, work with the tools you have. In archives, it's really true that every small step you make makes a really big difference, both in preserving your work and making it more accessible. Anything you do is good because any little bit of being more preserved and more accessible is a huge piece of progress for your work. Don't worry if you can't do everything all at once. Doing something's always better than doing nothing, and you will continue just chipping away at it over time. So don't worry if you don't have if you don't have the ability to be a full-time archivist right now. It's not reasonable to expect you to be because you're all artists and, practicing archives are, something you're doing because you have to preserve your legacy, not because it's like your main form. So I will say, I'll put a bunch of links in the chat. I think I might try to do it after so that I'm not exiting my slides every time. But I will say the Dance USA Artist Legacy Toolkit that Tom mentioned is a great resource for you if you just need something to refer back to. It has a ton of free resources and tools and templates in it, and I'll mention a few of them specifically. The inventory template that Tom mentioned, if you're doing physical inventorying of your physical material, is my favorite part of the toolkit. It's just like an Excel sheet that you can download, edit it, and use it however you want. And there's a separate document that has instructions for it so that if you're, you can understand how to use it. I really recommend using that if you're going to do a physical inventory. Okay. Diving into digital stuff, I'm going to talk about basic digital records management. I'm To define records management, it's basically just like how you're storing and saving things. It's how you make sure things are organized and findable, which is something we all do every day anyway. I'm mostly going to focus today on what we think of as records management rather than some of the other parts of digital archiving, which can include like databases and archive software or like digitizing practices. I'm mostly focused on records management because I think it's sort of the foundation for a digital archive. And I know you're all at different places in your journey, and no matter where you are, you need records management. So I'm going to talk about that. And if you have questions about other parts of digital archiving, I'm open to them. Um, the first few points about digital records management are to step one, try to have your files saved in as centralized a place as possible. So as much as you can pull all your records together into, say, a drive, a hard drive, a Google Drive, a server. If you're, if you're working with a relatively small number of materials, it could just be one computer, on the computer's hard drive, rather than doing what I think most of us kind of do in our personal lives of having stuff stored a million different places. So many of us have a Google Drive and a Dropbox and a server and a Vimeo, and where stuff is stored everywhere. And that can be fine for your day-to-day use, just in your life. But for your archive, it's going to be really helpful to pull things together into one place as much as you can. And if you can't do that, just having as few places as possible where your archives are stored. The other important steps are going to be to have a consistent file naming system, save your folders in a very useful folder structure, and to save multiple copies of your stuff in different places, which is really backing up your data, is what I'm talking about there. And those points I'm going to go into more detail on now. So, first of all, having a good file naming system. This is really important in your digital records management. Um, Something that I thought was thinking about when Tom was speaking, inventorying is so important when it comes to physical materials. I totally agree with Tom that if you're going to do one thing with your physical stuff, like make that inventory, it'll help you so much. I often get asked if people should inventory their digital materials. And really, what I usually say to that question is if you name and sort your files correctly, that already is its own inventory. When you open up the folder, the archive folder, it'll list what everything is because you've organized it and named it so well. So that's why you try to have that, consistent system, because you can find what you need and you can search your folders correctly. So the first thing is you want to have a very simple and clear and consistent system for naming your files, and you want to document that system. So like Tom was talking about creating some kind of manual for future use, I definitely recommend, it doesn't have to be fancy. When you come up with your file naming structure, write it down somewhere and make sure everyone else who's naming files has access to that little manual. You do want to use what we call, and this, I think this is one place I was thinking, well, this applies to the physical too. You want to use what we call in archives world a controlled vocabulary. And that's just a fancy way of saying you're always using the same version of names. So I think I have an example on my next slide. So here's like an example of times you could have different versions, and instead you want to try to be consistent. So, you can see that you might call it Yerba Buena, you might call it YBCA. You might be calling things drafts, you might be calling them edits, you might be using people's full names, or you might be using their initials. All of these, date formats are a big one because you can format dates in a lot of different ways. All of these things you can choose. There's not one right way to do it in your process. It's just being consistent about it, because when you start doing it differently, that's when your files don't sort properly and you can't search for what you need. So just writing it down, being consistent, and having other people follow the same procedure will help you so much. Consider naming your files with more detail when they're photo and video files. So photo and video files will often come to you, either you're taking them yourself or someone's sending them to you. And they'll often come with, like 5213.jpg. You definitely want to rename as much as possible those to have important information in them. It's really good to rename all of your files, even like, programs and other types of paper materials. But photos and videos are the most important to rename because they don't sort of contain the essential information within them. If you have something like a grant application or a program, still rename it, give it a good name. But if you don't, you'll open it up and you'll know what it is. With photo and video, if it's been 10 years since it was taken and it never got a useful file name, someone could open it up and have no idea what's in there. So you want to consider putting a lot of the crucial information right into the name. So things with photos and videos that are important are date. If it's a if it's a work, maybe the title of the work, or if it's an event, the title of the event, something like that. Maybe the location, if location's important. The photographer name is usually important. And if you have a bunch of photos that are from the same, that would have all the same information otherwise, you want to give it a number in the series because you never want two of the same file name. So you'd always want to give it, as you can see, my little example file name at the bottom has a 004 at the end. Say you had, 100 photos in this from this performance. I would know this was the fourth one, and no other photo was going to get that exact file name. So you can see that example has the year, it has the name of the show, the venue, the photographer, and the number. Moving on from file naming, the next step, kind of like getting a little bit wider, is the file structure. So that's, how you're sorting things into various folders. My first advice to people is always just to look at what you're doing now. Everybody kind of inherently naturally creates some sort of file structure, and it ranges how much people are intentional about it versus just kind of doing whatever, comes naturally. But no matter what, you've probably done some type of organization. So you want to just look at the way you naturally organize things and think about what about my system works well for me and what about it does not work well when I'm trying to find something or send something to someone. How do you, and if you have colleagues or collaborators who are looking in your archives, how do you use the files? How are you looking for them? Do you think, oh, I really need a photo of this dance? Or do you think I need a photo that reflects, our community programs? Or I need a photo from 2010? Like, how are you imagining when you're going to find a photo, your first step in looking for it? And then you want to build your file structure around that. So you want to make sure it aligns with the way that your organization actually works. It doesn't make sense for everybody to, sort by year. For some people, year is not the defining thing about their organization. So make sure that it aligns with your activities, with your mission. And again, consistency is really the key. Make sure everyone who you're kind of considering involved in the archives version of your documents is using the same system. Consistency is really key. So here's a little, just an example photo. This is not like prescriptive, but this is just so you can see what it might look like. You can see this artist has the main folders. Their big organizational system is split from creative, education, financial, and marketing. So that's how they would divide their work up into categories. And then once you open up the creative folder, you can see it's organized by year. And then once you opened up the 2021 folder, it's organized by material type. So like you can see there's choreographic notes, there's photos, and then under performance, you see all those great, numbered photos so that there's no two with the same number. So this is just an example, but you can all have these slides after, and I wanted to make sure you had, some examples to work from. My big tips for success are things I've really already said, but I just like to reinforce them. Write down your systems in the manual so people can understand, and you don't have to verbally explain to every person why it's this way. They can just read it and have it be very clear to them. Be consistent. Make a habit of taking a little time now to save a little time later, or a lot of time later. So this is, a point about, I think part of the reason this can feel so overwhelming, and some of you may be feeling this right now. If you think about going back and renaming all your old files, it does feel quite daunting. Most of us, the digital world has created such a proliferation of materials. That feels daunting. And I can talk a little bit more about how you might approach that in a second. And the good news is that if you're still active artists, which I think most of you are, and you're creating and taking in materials now, you can implement these things moving forward. And you can do a little bit of extra work when you're kind of organizing your new digital files now, so that down the road, there's fewer things to go back and fix. In terms of going back to that big backlog of digital materials, there's different approaches. I would say my feeling is that, again, chipping away at it in small pieces is really great. If you can just dedicate, an hour a day or, an hour a week at your organization, somebody who can just sort of start gradually renaming and reorganizing files, and creating that really consistent, clear system. It seems like a lot, but eventually you'll really chip away at the big backlog of digital material. So I really recommend Again, not feeling like you have to do it all at once because that it's the perfect is always the enemy of the good and the enemy of the done. So just do a little bit and try to, move it along. And this is a job. I know everybody's kind of artistic process and organizations and artistry are different. If you're someone who works with like interns or, if any of your dancers take on small amounts of administrative work, anything like that, those can be really good people to do this kind of work because it can also help familiarize them with the background of the company. If you're like, hey, rename these photos from 1980, then they'll also start seeing the work that you were doing in 1980. So it can actually be kind of interesting for them. So I do recommend that. Um, I'm going to talk a little bit about digital preservation. Um, this is an area where a lot of people sort of have this feeling like, oh, my digital files are just there. They're always going to be there. Unlike, sometimes with paper and with physical stuff, we have a feeling it's decaying. And not to be, an alarmist, I don't want to scare you, but I do want to say that it's really important to remember that just because something is digital does not mean it's preserved, and it does not mean it's going to last forever. Digital things are actually in many ways more fragile than physical. And the good news is that there are many ways you can preserve your digital files so nothing goes wrong and you don't have a big disaster. The little silly acronym in the archives world that we use is LOCKSS. Lots of copies keep stuff safe. Again, like the inventory for your physical material, if there's one thing you go and do from this presentation that you haven't done already, I hope that it's you back up your digital files. Even if they're not the most organized right now and you're going to work on organizing them, don't wait till they're perfect to back them up. Just back them up now because it's better to have them than to not have them. So when we talk about backing up files, that just means having them in more than one location. So having two digital backups, so you can think of this differently. You can think about having, your original archives copies and then two separate backups. If that's too many for you, you can have just your main archives and then your one backup. Basically, the more the better. So two's okay, three is great. Um, and you want to have them in two separate locations, and that's locations in a variety of ways. So both um, it could be two digital locations, like say a physical hard drive, an external hard drive, which I'll talk a little more about, and then a cloud storage platform. Or if you have two hard drives, you'd want to literally store them in two separate physical locations because you want to think about, if something happens to one physical hard drive, God forbid, where would the other one be safe from whatever happened to that one? So you can think about it a few different ways. Um, but so that's, you want to have multiple copies in different places. And you also want to consider having maybe at least one or two archival copies. So I know we're talking about archives, but um, I use that term. People use lots of different things like master copies or backup copies or whatever you want to call it. But it's basically just to say it's not one that you're working from. It's not one that when someone emails you and says, "Hey, I'm writing an article. Do you have a photo you can send me?" You dive in there and you pull it and oh, I want to crop it. I'm going to crop it first before I send it. That's the version you're not doing that. It's just the backup. And then you can have your use copy where you're cropping and you're, editing and all that kind of stuff. So you want to try to separate, things that you're editing versus things that are considered done and archival. Here's just one example of how you could do this. Again, this is not prescriptive. It's just showing like what it might look like to have, an archives or master copy on the left versus a use copy on the right. So you can see the use copy has like low and high resolution and cropped and all these types of things, whereas the master copy is just, the original archival photos. I want to talk a little bit about external hard drives because I know people get confused and overwhelmed by them. Um, they can be much simpler, they can be as simple as you need them to be. I recommend thinking about, size. Most of it, that your digital files take up a certain amount of space, and you just want to make sure that you buy hard drives that can fit all of that stuff on it with some room to grow. Don't just, if you have, 10 gigabytes of material, don't get a 10 gigabyte hard drive because you're bound to make more digital material. Maybe get a 20 gigabyte hard drive. Um, Look when you're buying them about, what device do you use and is it compatible with that device? Are you using Mac? Are you using PC? Um, think about, when you're thinking about price, read the reviews, see what's good. Remember that this is not something you're going to buy a bunch of. So if you can, invest in a good one, in one that has good, reviews and things, you're only going to need to buy them every like 5 or so years. So do try to invest if you can. It's really important to make sure your hard drives stay healthy. You want to check on them often. If they're not something you're looking at often, if you're not someone who's kind of updating often, check on them at least once a year, if not more. Just plug them in, make sure everything's good. Definitely change them out. So even if they seem okay, don't just keep using the same one forever. Every like 5 to 7 years, you probably just want to get a new one and just do a new backup. And you can keep the old one too, and you'll just have more copies. But that's when they start to get at risk of dying. Basically, anything weird your hard drive is doing is a risk that it's crashing. So if you notice it's doing something funky, that's like the time to take a pause. So if your computer won't recognize it when you plug it in, if it's really loud all of a sudden in a way it wasn't before, if it's making weird noises, if files are disappearing, if you're getting error messages, if it's really slow, basically, again, anything outside of the ordinary could be, it might not be, but it could be a sign that your hard drive is going to crash, which some of you may have had a hard drive crash before, and it's very tragic. So this is why I say all of this, because I think it's an easy way to save yourself tragedy. If you think that your hard drive is crashing, just don't use it. Take it to someone. You can just Google like data recovery specialist in my area, and you can take it to someone whose job it is to look at, make sure your data is safe. Don't plug it in after you discover that something's weird. Just stop using it and take it to a data recovery specialist. Make sure you're storing them. Same thing with what Tom was talking about with your physical materials. Keep the same care with your hard drives. Store them away from dust, water pipes, extreme heat, extreme cold. And again, if you have more than one hard drive, store them in separate locations. And that can be like give one to if you have 2 employees, each employee keeps one. If your mom has a separate house, give it to, it doesn't have to be fancy, but just keep them separate so that if something happens in one location, the other one's safe. I'm going to try to wrap up because I know we're getting short on time. Cloud storage, a lot of us are using things I know like Google Drive, Dropbox, Microsoft products, OneDrive. These are great products. They're mostly good for things like collaborating, and they're not always the best for archiving. This is because they often are built for collaboration where like you might have a lot of cooks in the kitchen. You might be able to be giving people access to look at things, to edit things. They're a little bit open to people can be changing and altering things that you might not want them to. It's possible, if you're the only person working, it's possible one of these will work for your archives. I don't mean as a rule that you can't use them. It's just think about access levels and editing before you make it your archives copy. There are other cloud, if you want to use the cloud, there are other services that are more just like, here's a backup that just sits there and nobody's going to be editing the stuff in there. I like to talk about this one just because it's what I use, and I think people like to have a recommendation. I'm not getting paid. I probably should be because I recommended them in multiple presentations, and I think people I know have gotten it because I've recommended it. So I should probably try to get a sponsorship. But I use this thing called Backblaze. It's just because it's easy. I did notice that the price just went up I think I'm grandfathered into a cheaper price. So that's a little unfortunate, but I like it because they've changed recently where it used to only really be great if you were like a person, like an individual. Now they actually have good business plans and stuff. So if you have multiple employees or multiple devices, you can look into it too. It's good because it does automatic backups. And you can access those automatic backups from any device, any computer. Um, I'm mostly talking about the individual plan because I'm just not as familiar with the business plan. But it's hard to find something with unlimited space. So especially if you're an independent, like if you're an individual and you're not working with a whole team of employees or a whole team of, multiple computers, I really like Backblaze because it just backs up my computer every day. And if something if my computer completely crashes, I know that all my stuff is safe. So there's lots of other options, but this is one that I recommend. I'm almost done. Don't keep your archival quality backups on CDs or flash drives. Most people aren't anymore because they're kind of older mediums these days, but some people still use them. You can use them for sharing files if these are, convenient for you. You can give someone, a copy on a flash drive, but don't use it for your backup. They'll They'll crash, they'll break, they won't, they're not going to have high quality versions on them. There's all sorts of reasons, but just don't do it. Really quickly, I want to talk a little bit about intellectual property because I know Cora mentioned that this was a issue and a thing a lot of you were thinking about. It's not quite just digital, but it's related. Um, I know a lot of you probably there's a lot of pieces of the puzzle when it comes to intellectual property and dance performance art. Um, I like to always start by telling people that they can rest easy knowing that you have the right to keep your archives and make them available internally and at your organization on site, no matter what. It's never going to be a crime or breaking intellectual property law just to have archives. Even if you don't own all the rights within the materials, you can have them. And if someone's at your space or you're sharing it, just directly with them, you can do that. It gets more complicated when you want to share things publicly. So usually creative ownership is retained by an artist or a creator unless they've done work under a work for hire contract. So for a lot of people in dance and the arts and cultural work, that means like musicians, composers, photographers, costume designers, all these types of people we work with. Um, Unless you have something that says that it was work for hire, they probably still own the intellectual property over their work. So having good contracts is really important with knowing who owns the rights. If you have contracts from the past with these types of collaborators, pull them out when you're doing your archives because it'll help you know what you can share and what you can't. If they did it for work for hire and you own the rights, share it. If they own the rights, you might want to go back to them and try to get a signature on it. You can always make a contract after the fact, even if the work is already done, even if it's 10 years ago, and you can make a new contract. And if they're willing to sign it, you can get those rights. So that's kind of it's a quick and dirty overview of work for hire and how people own rights. But music is complicated, so I don't want to spend too much time on it because you could do a 3-hour presentation on it and barely scratch the surface. But just know that music is one of the more complicated areas. It does have overlapping rights, so there's like separate rights for the piece of music and for the specific recording. So every recorded piece of music has at least 2 layers of rights, if not more. If you're doing something like creating a story show where the music tells the story with it, which is like a lot of like classical ballets work that way, but also other forms. It's possible there's a whole nother layer because that's called synchronization rights. Again, I'm not a lawyer and I'm not going to go too much into this, but if you have questions about it, it's just mostly for you to know that it is one of the things you'll have to be the most conscious of if you're trying to share your materials more widely. I think this is like my last thing, but I just wanted to quickly touch on fair use. This is how people can share materials that you don't own the legal copyright to. It's basically about sharing like limited portions of works or transformative, works where you're sharing them in a way that transforms the entire, reason of the work being out there. There aren't really strict, hard and fast rules about how fair use works. It's always specific to the individual circumstance. And there is the best resource I can share with you. I'm going to put a link in the chat after this is the statement of best practices in fair use of dance related materials that a coalition made years ago. So I'm going to put that in the chat. But I feel like that IP section is a little bit rushed, but it's mostly to say that if you own all the rights and you're confident you do, you can put it online. If you're not confident you own all the rights, it can be a little risky to put stuff online and stream it, but you can always make contracts that are really clear and make sure you have the rights. And there might be ways you can share short portions of it or different, use it edited and use it in different ways, even if you don't have the rights. So I'm happy to answer more specific questions about that, but I don't want to, I know we're low on time for questions. So I think I'm going to wrap up there and put some stuff in the chat.
Great. Thank you so much, Hallie. Thank you, Tom, for sharing that really valuable information with us. I want to first check and see if there's just any questions right off the top, because we want these presentations to be informational for you, but we also really want to listen and understand what are the concerns of our community. Where are you at with your archiving journey? What kinds of questions do you have? So you can put that question in the chat. You could just raise your hand right now. You can just speak out, because we are want to make sure that we get to any information that you might have questions about. Also, if you just want to share your experience with your archiving journey, we're here to kind of create a community that we can share resources around. So let me just pause for a moment to see if there are any questions just right now. Andrea, do we have anything in the chat?
No questions from the chat so far. Lady Cherise says, very helpful and instructive. Am I saying that correctly, Cherise?
Okay.
Be off camera.
Thank you. Thank you. We really appreciate that. That's the whole idea. We know that, you know, we could all go on for at length about these different topics. There's a lot more, you know, that we can dive into. We also don't want these Zoom meetings, these Zoom sessions to be overwhelming. Archiving can feel overwhelming. Just all of the stuff that all of us have accumulated over the years and decades that we have been around. World Arts West is almost 50 years old. We'll be celebrating 50 years in 2028. And we know that there are lots of organizations in our community that are 20, 30, 40, 50 years old also. And that comes with an accumulation of a lot of things. So keep, you know, if you have questions, please raise your hand or put them in the chat. But I am going to share a little bit about World Arts West journey, just really quick, because we're almost at time to wrap up. But so I really appreciate Tom and Hallie sharing the importance of doing inventorying and keeping your things safe. We had materials at different locations. We got them all into inside storage. You know, we've begun our inventorying journey. One of the reasons why inventorying is also super important is because as you apply for funding, which is I hope you will, and we are looking to create a resource list for places that people can apply for funding. Being able to share, you know, what you want to have digitized or what you want to be able to share with the community specifically is really important for funders. So, you know, keep that in mind as you're going. Keep in mind that you don't have to start with everything. At World Arts West, we've really you know, been through sort of a journey with how can we share our archive? How can we get it digitized? How can we get it funded? And what we've come to understand is that what we think we want to do is, you know, share pieces of it at first, because it's very overwhelming to say, hey, can you digitize our 50 years of memorabilia or videos or photos? But if we can say, hey, can we, you know, share, can we get digitized, you know, a performance from this year? Or can we digitize, you know, a section around a certain culture or a certain issue in dance community? That becomes much more, I think, easier for funders to understand. And then once you have something small digitized or organized in a way that you can share, that becomes the thing that you can share with funders or your community to then garner support for your archive journey. So people can really start to see the value of what you are holding and what you would like to share with the rest of us. So if you would like to leave us questions, comments, suggestions, we really welcome that and are hoping to build community around this. So please go ahead and do that. I would really like to thank Hallie and Tom for being here and sharing their expertise and making themselves available. I would like to thank our funder, who was the Performing Arts Readiness Network grant through Lyricist, who let us put on this series of meetings. Please keep in mind that we will have more coming up. So please continue to engage with us. I think this is going to be a really important issue. If you haven't been paying attention, there's a lot of sort of cultural erasure going on right now, and we'd really like to make sure that we continue to support the preservation of all of our cultures and all of our histories. So I think with that, I'm going to go ahead and wrap up. Thank you, Andrea, for keeping us on time. Thank you, Noelle, for making sure that everybody was here and able to participate with us. One more thank you to Hallie and Tom. And I think we're going to wrap it up. Thank you so much.